Then what we decided to look at is, okay, so we think that the wild horse model's a crock of shit. The barefoot model looks to be a crock of shit. Let's see if it's shoeing that does the damage. We took two populations of horses, one that were managed barefoot and one that were managed shod. We applied the same standardized trimming protocol that we've used in all the previous studies, the same measurement protocol, and we used the standardized shoeing protocol from the UK training standards for what we call a riding horse, you would call a leisure horse, for the fit and the shoe selection. And we followed those horses over a 6-month shoeing cycle. What do you think was the major difference? What do you think occurred?
By following protocol?
Sorry?
By follow, I'm sorry,
We followed the same trimming protocol.
Right.
So we're both trimmed exactly the same. Every 35 days, we used the same measurement protocol, and we used a standardized shoeing protocol. The horses that were shod were a very narrow group in terms of breed, size, age, work, management. In fact, they're all in one yard. And we followed them over this 6-month period. Okay, if you want to have nicer, more upright feet, barefoot is the way forward. They all came more upright, and they migrated palmally, and you got more heel depth and more sole depth. But they also lost toe height, sole depth. The shod horses, bearing in mind that I am to horseshoeing what Michelangelo was to ceiling painting. The shod horses stayed the same. In other words, the best that I could manage was to put them back to where they were the first time that I'd shod them. So during the shoeing cycle, they'd migrate dorsally, they took the sole would flatten, the wool would push out the toe, just as we see, and then the best that I could manage was to put them back where they were. And they stayed like that through the duration. So what that says is that there is a difference in the mechanical behavior of the internal structures of the foot between shod and unshod. Okay? So let's just briefly have a look at what that is. I'll just move over here. This is the unshod group. This black is the bearing border length from heel to toe, migrating palmally. In other words, the heels are coming back underneath the limb. This is the cock core distance. There was a considerable shift in it first trim, and then it stabilized. This is the shod group. First time you got into a decent shape, and then subsequently they stayed pretty much exactly where they were. So if you look up here, okay, we lost 6.5 millimeters of dorsal wall height on average on the unshod group. Lost a bit of heel height, but we got palmar migration, okay, 7.1%. And on the shod group, we didn't lose as much vertical height. We lost heel-toe height ratio because the heels collapsed, and we got dorsal migration rather than palmar migration. So the toe went forward and the heels went forward. So then we thought, well, okay, we think that that's got to do with the mechanical behavior. Let's have a look at the mechanical behaviour. So we ran these horses, same groups, up and down the pressure mat, pre-trim, post-shod. And that's represented up here by this graph. The green is the pre-trim peak vertical pressure point along the timeline. So this is the amount of pressure, this is the time of the stance phase. Green is pre-trim, black is post-trim, and the red is post-shooting. So, with 5-6 weeks growth on, the peak pressure point is roughly about where the navicular bone is. Along the timeline, you imagine that foot landing, pushing down and moving forward. It represents, the back of the heel to the end of the toe, anatomically. So peak pressure is in the back third of the foot with 5-6 weeks growth on. You trim it and stand it up to where you want it, what we consider to be balanced. Peak pressure is at the toe at the point of breakover. And you put the shoe on, and peak pressure is in the middle. Right over where that solar arch is. So what's happening is, because we lift it up off the floor, and now the sole, the frog, the bars are not engaged in weight sharing, it's collapsing through the gap that you provide. So that's why with the shoe on, the best that you, just a normal shoe, the best that you can expect is to maintain it in a certain position with a normal riding horse shoe. We'll discuss managing those positions for better effect slightly later. It's just basic horseshoe. So now we get to the kind of crunch of it. So we want to try and look at, is there a link between all this? We now think that we've validated our trimming protocol and our mapping protocol enough to be able to say, look at diseases and see if we can link them to these measurements. So, these are the measurements, to remind you again, taken as proportions of the sagittal length, from the end of the heel bulb to the end of the toe. The core, cop, and this point of breakover, all taken as a percentage of this overall sagittal length. Over here, these are the control group of 300 cadaver limbs trimmed to the standard protocol, and those measurements taken. And on the right, you see disease categories of deep flexor tendon lesions over the navicular bone, coffin joint arthritis, and navicular lesions in another group of 300 that were admitted to the University Hospital for MRI investigation. Those in those groups have had no intervention by me. We're just investigating whether there's a link between these foot proportions and these diseases. You can see, for example, that the heel buttress position, which is normally about 14% of the total length, the heels are considerably further shot forward, ranging up to nearly 20% of the total length in these three disease categories. If you take the core measurement, which is from here to where our diagonal marks met, you can see that in a normal horse, it's roughly about halfway, but in the disease categories, it's 3-4% further back. That same 3 or 4% that we keep running across. That same 3 or 4% that Malvern and Van Heel showed that the center of pressure could be rotated over the foot axis over an 8-week foot cycle. In other words, it can cope with about 3% change, but beyond that, and consistently beyond that, things start to break down. So, center of pressure again, particularly here, I want you to note the difference between the coffin joint arthritis group and the navicular and flexor tendon injury groups. The coffin joint arthritis group, center of pressure is further forward. Navicular and tendon injuries is further back. And are exactly what we'd expect. So, here's a couple of bone shakers for you then. All right. An increase in the of 1% of the bearing border length as a percentage of the sagittal length. In other words, reducing the height of the heels to extend the weight-bearing surface will reduce the odds of a horse having navicular disease lesions by 87%. Contrary to what we've been told in textbooks, leave the heels up, lowering the heels and lengthening the base of support reduces the risk factor of navicular lesions by 87%. An increase in the cock distance, that's there, in other words, this distance becoming longer, okay, which is a reduction in the solar arch, in other words, it flattening, increases the odds of navicular disease by 128%. I'll say that again. Flattening out of the sole increases the odds of navicular disease by 128%. Mike Savoldi, who is not here, has been harping on about this for 7 years. I would like you, if this is going live, to stand up and applaud Mike Savoldi, because he did this without He's been saying it for years. Okay. An increase in the core length, in other words, cock coming back and the core going forward, so now we're gaining solar arch. Okay, reduces the odds of deep flexor tendon injuries, those loads running over the navicular bone, by 83%. Makes sense. And reducing the foot, okay, so that you have an increase in what's called the heel-toe height ratio, which in the book says it's supposed to be 3:1, and it's actually about 2.8:1. But keeping it around 2.8:1 reduces the chance of coffin joint lesions or arthritis of the coffin joint by 82%. So, I'm going to skip that one just for a second because I want a little kind of take-home message here for that bit. The thing about this is, you can see that Farriery, or the application of it, can be shown to have a direct effect on the health and welfare of the patients that are charged towards the horse. But it's in the trim, stupid. The trimming methodology we need to pay more attention to. I had a conversation with somebody last night in a bar, and it was about this very thing. We drive into a yard, we unload the van, we drag the horse out, we take his shoes off, we cut his feet down, and we go, right, okay, what are we going to do? It's too late, you've done it, it's on the floor. Now you're going to spend the next hour trying to repair that damage. If you're lucky, if you've got the skill. And most of us haven't. Because we haven't sat and assessed it and weighed it up and analysed it. What is it that we want to remove? We haven't understood the way that this thing is deforming. When these feet migrate dorsally, what happens is they lose vertical depth. The sole flattens have shown you that core distance flattens. That's a loss of vertical depth of sole between the floor and the pedal bone. Instead of managing the feet by bringing them back underneath themselves, we get straight underneath it, run our nippers around and chop some more off. It's now lower. So now we can't manipulate this scoop capsule backwards enough without weakening it to get it in the right place. We need three things out of the trim: sole mass, wall strength, and proportional values, particularly the heel-toe height ratio. LSR in 2012 showed that an increase of 1% in the heel-toe height ratio increased the tension on the deep flexor tendon by 4%. Sorry, reduced the tension on the deep flexor tendon by 4%. That tension on the deep flexor tendon is what slams the navicular bone into the back of P2. So we've got to pay a bit more attention. There was a study in 2009 where some Dutch scientists took some similar measurements from a group of 6 farriers that each trimmed 6 horses on 6 different occasions. And these horses were pretty narrowly grouped. They were all warm bloods and they're all cropped, so we know what they look like. But there was a difference between each of the farriers. Well, you could kind of half expect that. That's kind of technique and the way they've been taught. But what was worse was that there was a significant difference between each of those farriers on each occasion. In other words, the same farrier didn't do the same thing twice. We need to pay a bit more attention. That's the take-home message. What we understand as foot balance is a perfectly working, serviceable guide. But we need to understand how it's distorted and how we can restore those proportions for mechanical efficiency. Not what the friggin' hell it looks like, but so that it can operate properly. It doesn't matter if it looks like me, as long as it can operate as well as I can. So, anyway, that's a little political statement. So there's the difference from Max of Oldie in the 2 kinds of feet you've got, this shift of this top core distance. And that seems to be the crucial part. So what's going on? Well, what we try to do, and what you're going to see now, is a methodology that's designed around trying to shoot around that grid. On the basis that the evidence so far suggests that a 50-50 relationship between core and the heel end and breakover is probably the most mechanically efficient that we can get. You can't always achieve that with foot trim because conformationally they're all different. But they will add in variations to the way that they manage their feet and limbs to accommodate those differences. So what we've got to do is place our base, the working end, so that it's concentric around its musculoskeletal system for the maximum efficiency and the minimum of strain. Any one of your girlfriends will tell you that come the end of a long shift, the first thing that's got to go is that. You see them all, they can't even get the key out of the door, can they? Oh! Horses are the same, except they can't go, You need to maintain some kind of efficiency. So here's some little things for you to think about. This is to do with the endurance, but it doesn't matter. That foot slams into the ground 220 times a mile. The force of that foot slamming into the ground 220 times a mile is exasperated by speed and weight. Because force is mass times acceleration. Every time that foot hits the ground, it's having a car crash. It's exactly what it's having. But the foot mechanism and the structures inside it are designed like a crumple zone in a modern car. Oh, you don't have them in America, do you? They're the European ones, you know, the Japanese ones. And that's designed with one purpose in mind. So that if you do have to stop suddenly, what's not going to happen is the thing that this car is trying to protect you and not going flying through the frigging windscreen or the engine going flying through you. In the foot, that's the pedal button and its structures. Cal, can I borrow you? And let me borrow a nice, fit, athletic young man. You. I'm now going to demonstrate what happens to the foot 220 times. You stand there, Calvin, and you be the linebacker for the San Diego Chargers. You're not wrong. Have you got Medicare? Good luck, be brave. Think of your forefathers. What I want you to do is I want you to go hurtling down there at a reasonable pace and crash into that. Oh, a little trot. Yeah, a little trot. See what happened there? For Calvin, it was easy because his crumple zone is a bit like mine. And it just absorbed the shock. But his crumple zone, whilst he's fit and athletic, he hasn't got no crumple zone. So he just bounced straight off him. Boom. Now what I want you to do is do it again, but I want you to just deflect it shoulder to shoulder. So your right shoulder wants to hit his left. No, just because not only have we just demonstrated the straightforward up and down bit, but now we're just going to demonstrate the off-axis rotation that happens when these things are going around corners at 35 miles an hour. You can crash. Go for it, son. Give it some. Go on, line.